Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. We are delighted to have you with us. We know that these have been challenging times. This is not a normal situation for any of us, and we know that there have been a lot of questions, which is why we at Alley Cat Allies have been working with organizations and experts all around the animal welfare community, and we wanted to come to you and talk about some ideas that we've had for fundraising for animals in challenging times, even during a pandemic. My name is Brianna Lovell, and I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement and Events at Alley Cat Allies, and for today, I'm going to be your moderator. And before we get into our content, I have just a couple slides to walk you through. So if you are familiar with our webinars, then you know that we offer you a lot of content in a short amount of time, so I hope that you're ready to take some notes. You will have access to a recorded version of this webinar. However, we are not going to be able to share the slides. So I do encourage you to have pen and paper handy, take those notes, take screenshots if you like, but we are going to share a recording, but we cannot offer you the actual slide presentation. So throughout this webinar, you will be able to see me and you'll be able to see and hear our presenters. However, just to keep things moving along, all of our attendees are muted. So all of our webinars are available. Like I said, we are recording, and you can access this information along with any of our webinar topics there on your screen at alleycat.org/webinar. Whether you are interested in learning more about trap, neuter, return, different fundraising resources, advocacy, we even have an anti-cruelty webinar. All that information is there for you at any time, again, at alleycat.org/webinar. And then I do want to point out your GoToWebinar toolbar. This is a really handy toolbar. As I said, you guys are going to be muted as we go along. So if you do have questions, you can submit them to me. I will be moderating, and so that means I will be taking a look at those questions as they are submitted, and then I'm going to line them up for the end of today's presentation. So you can use your toolbar just like it shows you on the screen here. Type in your question. If you don't hear from me right away, I don't want you to worry. I have received it. I'm just lining that up so we can talk about it at the end of today's presentation. I also want to point out the section called handouts. There is one section called handouts available to you, and that will include a PDF that our presenters will talk about as they go through the presentation, and that is yours to download, print, share, use as you like. That is a resource developed specifically for you. And if you have any questions that we aren't able to answer today, or just any questions at all, you can always go to alleycat.org/get-help. And that will be a terrific landing page to kind of guide you to all the different information that we have available and the resources that are there for you and for the cats in your community. And before we get going, I do just want to briefly talk about our Feral Friends Network. This is truly one of our most valuable resources. It is a resource directory of people and places all around the country, around the globe, who are helping cats in their communities. It is searchable by zip code, so you always have access to the resources that are closest to where you need them. And it is truly your golden ticket if you are looking for help with cats. And so many people reach out to us wanting to help, wanting to reach out and do the right thing for the cats in their backyards, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, and they just don't know where to turn. And this is an incredible resource for them. And so if you would like to connect with like-minded people in your community, this is a great way to do that. Or if you think you or someone you know or the organization you volunteer for, if you would like to join our network and offer your resources, we would love to have you. So you can head on over to alleycat.org/feral friends to learn a bit more and submit your application. All right, now the reason that we are all here today is to talk about fundraising and what we can do right now to keep on life-saving. And so we have two presenters here with you today, Miss Bonney Brown and Diane Blankenburg. So they are both with the Humane Network, a nonprofit organization that helps animal welfare organizations, shelters, and animal services agencies dramatically and responsibly increase animal life-saving and create sustainable results by providing personalized consulting, practical information, model programs, and networking opportunities. Prior to founding the Humane Network, Bonney and Diane worked together at the Nevada Humane Society, an open admission no-kill shelter. Bonney was the executive director and Diane was the community programs development director, and together they led the effort to achieve and sustain a 94% community-wide live release rate for cats and dogs. Bonney and Diane both co-created and teach for the University of the Pacific's Animal Shelter Management Certificate Program. Bonnie Brown is a former Chief Operating Officer for Best Friends Animal Society and Campaign Director for Alley Cat Allies. Bonnie has been a writer for Animal Sheltering Magazine and has spoken at numerous conferences. Diane was the Network Director for Best Friends Animal Society and led Hurricane Katrina rescue and recovery efforts on location in New Orleans for Alley Cat Allies. Diane has authored animal-related columns for 2 different newspapers. So they have a wealth of experience, knowledge, and expertise to share, and they are here to impart some of that knowledge unto you today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Miss Bonnie Brown.
Sounds great. Let's see. Just getting my screen up here for everybody. Okay, here we go. So welcome and thank you all for joining us today. We know how busy everyone is and appreciate that you made time to be with us here virtually. We're going to talk briefly about what we'll cover in this presentation. My colleague Diane Blankenburg and I will share strategies to connect with donors so you can continue your life-saving work for the cats. We're going to talk about how and why raising funds right now during the current pandemic is achievable. We're going to provide some advice and suggestions on things that you can say, ways to communicate with your donors, because this can sometimes be challenging or feel awkward to people. We're going to share some very specific strategies for fundraising right now, and that's also going to include sharing with you some of the key elements of successful donor communication. And lastly, we'll talk briefly about how to create an online or virtual event, especially important where many people had in-person events that are now going to be canceled. So with that, here we go. So while some organizations have scaled back their work due to various stay-at-home orders, we've heard from many groups that they feel that they should not be seeking funds for animals at this time. And while we can certainly see how you might come to that conclusion, there's really another way to look at this. Remember that people have not stopped caring about animals, even if they're also concerned about COVID-19 or other pressing issues in their lives. Just like you and me, many people out there are still thinking about the animals quite a bit, and they're concerned about the fates of the animals now, even though we're in the midst of a human health crisis. In fact, this time really could present an opportunity for us. Consider that some people actually have more time available to engage with your organization. For example, in general, social media usage is up over the last few months. Also, many people are seeking meaning and purpose. So this can be a really good time to engage your donors, potential adopters, volunteers in the work of your organization. And it can even be a good time to make new contacts. Keep in mind that many of your supporters are actually going to be glad to hear from you. They're going to be glad to know that your organization is out there, that you're still working on behalf of the animals, that you're coping with challenges related to kitten season. They're going to be happy to know that you are there working on behalf of the animals. Now, while it's true that many people are struggling financially at the moment, it's also important to keep in mind that not everyone is out of work or struggling, and that those who can afford to help are probably even more likely to be willing to help, knowing that others cannot. And even those who currently can't donate, they would still like to hear from you, and they'll remember your efforts for the animals when they're back on their feet financially. So this is one of the areas where many people say that they feel uncomfortable. What do they say? Do they acknowledge the current circumstances? Do they pretend nothing has changed? And our advice would be to acknowledge them and to focus on what people need to hear. So a good place to start, whoops, what am I doing here? Sorry. So a good place to start would be talking with or writing to your supporters and acknowledging the current situation. So what you'd want to say is something like, we've been thinking about you and your family, and you'll want to mention including their furry family members. So no need to apologize. We've seen several appeal letters where people are apologizing profusely for reaching out, but you really don't need to apologize. Remember, you're sharing news about a worthy cause. It's a cause that your supporters care deeply about, and you're asking for money on behalf of the animals. Your supporters are going to want to know that you are still there and that you're working actively on behalf of the animals, and they're going to appreciate that you've reached out, even if they personally aren't able to give right now. So there's no need to apologize. Provide some much needed good news. We all see, the current news is filled with stressful experiences, and many people are in fact very worried about the virus. So you can provide some much needed good news by sharing an uplifting story about an animal that your organization helped during this current crisis. Maybe it's a colony of cats that you have been feeding throughout the entire current situation, or perhaps your organization has a food bank where you provide food in order to keep pets in homes. Or you could perhaps share a story of someone who found a cat and kittens and is now taking care of them with help from your organization. So it doesn't have to be an overly elaborate story, but it should be a real story and a positive story about the work of your organization during this current time. Remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and so you want to be sure to include a photo, and you want to be sure that it's a good one. The photo needs to be crisp and clear, and ideally it's going to show a cat or several cats. Now, if your group helps dogs, obviously you would want to be including dogs in that. You want to be sure that you're cropping the photo so that you're focusing people's attention. And you want to be sure that the image is large enough to engage people emotionally so that they can make a connection. And this usually means by eye contact, but sometimes it's just a very tender photo or a cute photo of the animals that are being helped, and that's fine too. So tell people how they can help. Many people feel helpless right now, and they really welcome specific requests for help. Do you need donations of pet food for your food bank? Do you need supplies for foster homes? Maybe you actually need foster care volunteers. Perhaps you're seeking donations for something specific. The more specific you can be in your request, the more likely you are to actually receive what you need. Perhaps you're opening your spay-neuter clinic and you are looking for donations to spay-neuter a set number of cats. That would be an inspiring goal to share with people and to ask them to help. So be sure when you're telling people what you need, explain why. You don't have to go into great detail, but to explain that you need supplies for foster kittens, for example, maybe you need kitten milk replacer and bottles, or funding for veterinary care for the kittens. Those are the kinds of things you would want to explain. People like to know that their gift is going to make a difference, whether you're asking for money or whether you're asking for their volunteer time. So be sure that that's clear in your request. And remember, you're not imposing on people. You're actually doing people a favor by making it very clear what you need and how that will make a difference for the animals. Now with that, I'm going to pass things off to my colleague Diane Blankenburg, and I'll be back in a bit to share some more with you.
So hopefully everybody can see my screen now, which I am going to be talking about how to communicate with your supporters. Bonney was focusing on what to communicate, but we have several strategies and methods in which you can effectively communicate with them. The first thing to understand is that this isn't a time, as Bonney mentioned, to abandon your fundraising. And again, I also have talked with many people that felt not only apologetic, but just that it was inappropriate to even do at all. So it's certainly not the time to abandon it, but you may want to revise how you communicate with them and what the specific plan is for fundraising. So the first step is to review it and make sure you make any appropriate changes to your fundraising plan. And if you don't have one, it's just an excellent opportunity to create one. This is something that Humane Network can help with. Bonney and I have worked with many organizations and others on our team that have wanted to create a fundraising plan. And even at a strategic level, if you don't even feel like you're ready for that, you need to take it to a higher level, we can help you with the strategic planning piece of it too. As I know with some organization, the strategies in general have changed because of all the circumstances that Bonney has discussed. So one of the really critical things in dealing with or connecting with supporters is to have a list of who those people are. And again, I know that many of our clients in the past really didn't have all of their information in one place. And that's okay. But again, this is an opportunity to get organized and be sure you do gather it into one place. Some people use very large databases if there are large types of applications, if they're a large organization, but there are really inexpensive, simple ones to use like Little Green Light. And even Excel is fine if it's a small enough list and just some way to track who is in your list and what their specific contact information is. I know when Bonney and I worked at Nevada Humane Society, we just had zero money to spend on almost anything. And Excel was used a lot in a lot of different ways, but even in being able to collect our information as far as contacts. And even if we did have some databases, we were able to pull it from different sources and put it into one spreadsheet. So don't feel you have to spend a lot of money or make it too complicated, but just be sure that you do have all of your information in one place. And I just want to add to that is that something that's important to make part of your everyday culture of an organization is to gather contacts. I think it's easy to forget, but to be sure that your staff knows and whatever activities they're doing, that they're always gathering the information and providing it to whoever is maintaining your particular database. It's also a great opportunity to make personal contact with your larger donors. As I assume most of you know if you're already in this field, but if you don't, that the relationship piece of this is what's critical. It really is all about building and maintaining relationships over time. So I said it's a great opportunity to connect with your larger donors. It's a time to really find out how they're doing in this situation, and not necessarily to right off the bat ask them for funds. And also it's something that may not be comfortable to everybody, and if you are not comfortable calling people directly and talking to them, I would suggest that you find somebody, maybe somebody on your board, somebody who's in your executive management team, or even a Uber volunteer that is really good with people. I know at Nevada Humane Society, we had a woman that regularly called all of our donors to thank them for their contribution and just to make contact with them and make them feel special. And we used to get comments all the time from various donors that they so appreciated that and really almost felt like they were friends with this person on a very personal level. So there are people that really do enjoy making those contacts and are willing to do that on a volunteer basis if you don't have somebody within the organization. And some of you may ask, what is a high donor? It really depends on your organization. If you're in a very large organization with a very large budget, it can be multiple thousands. But for the average organization, smaller shelters and especially rescue groups, a $100 donor could be very significant. So if you do have some kind of donor database that you are using to track your incoming donations, take a look at it, and hopefully you can pull out some kind of report to be able to analyze what's in there. Look at the range of donations, look at where kind of the cutoffs are between different levels, and be able to probably easily determine what you would be considering a large donor for your particular organization. Now, Bonney talked about sharing good stories, positive stories, happy stories. This is especially a great time to use social media since so many more people are have more time free and are not engaged in a lot of other things, and they're working out of their home and not as involved in some of their social activities in person. So social media is just a great way to reach out. And again, people are looking for the uplifting news and not what's typically on TV right now. And again, you want to share a success story with key, really good photos, and thanking your supporters for making everything possible that you're able to do ongoing as well as during these particular trying times. Now, the use of direct mail, and by direct mail here, I mean actually mail that's printed and sent to individual supporters in the U.S. mail system. Some people feel like this is kind of passé and should not be used anymore, especially with all the social media that's out there. But what we have found, and what has been shown in other research, that it's still critical. There's a lot of people that don't do social media, but it also is a way to connect with people just in a different way. In order to get attention, you need to be able to address individuals from a lot of different ways and to do it multiple times. So we still really believe that direct mail is critical to your fundraising plan, and you need to be able to do it multiple times over a period of a year in order to be able to really see the return. Again, it's about keeping in touch and letting people know that you care and that you appreciate that all that they have done for your organization. Some groups may do a specific appeal letter, or you can put it in some kind of a newsletter format. But I think you always want to make sure that the newsletter is more focused on what the organization has accomplished because of your donations, and not just a timeline of everything that's happened during the week or during the month or during the year. Now, hopefully, if your email appeals would actually be done in coordination with your direct mail in addition to that. But some groups may not have the upfront funds to be able to afford to even publish a printed appeal letter, although usually you can at least get your expenses paid for initially in the return of the donations. But if you can't, then an email is another great way to keep in touch, and you can do a very similar thing. You can even use stories you've used before, or stories that with a different twist to them. But again, it's the same rules apply. You just want to be sure it's a very positive story, that you are providing great photos, and be sure you're always making it easy for people to donate. So providing a button right on the release, or excuse me, right on the email, so that they can quickly get to your website and donate without having to go through a lot of steps, is really critical. The other thing you want to be sure is that you're using some kind of email application that allows you to send out mass emails, something like MailChimp, or there are several others, and this allows you to be able to manage it better, and also make sure that you don't end up getting a lot of them going into junk mail, or getting your email blacklisted because of considering it might be spam or something like that. Now, we've talked multiple times, because it is so critical, of how you share your stories and making the most of your donor communications. One thing I want to mention here, and Bonney talked about, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You basically don't really have a story for these purposes if you don't have good photos. So this is another thing you want to build into the culture of your organization, to make sure people are constantly thinking, is this a story? Did we get photos? And even if they're not sure, it's better to take the photos and worry about it later, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to go back and take photos. So make sure that this is something that, again, is part of the culture of your organization. We used to have a camera that we left out with our staff at the front desk, so that whenever there was something special going on out there, that they could immediately take it and capture photos. I mean, these days our phones take as good of photos as sometimes any of cameras do. So usually everybody has a phone on them, and it's easy to do as long as that's part of their mindset. And once again, it's always about thanking your supporters for making your work possible, and making all the life-saving especially possible. You want to be sure that you're keeping your information communications concise and easy to read. Sometimes it's easy to try to cram too many different things in, and I think it loses focus. So it's helpful just to pick a couple great stories, and most of you probably are dealing mostly with cats. If you do happen to have dogs in your organization too, I would say be sure you're always providing a cat and a dog story, so that you're reaching people that may have a propensity for one over the other. This is another area where people sometimes are lax in, is that's to be really specific on what you want. Bonney covered this too, but if we don't ask, people will never know. And there's a lot of people that just really like to contribute to something that's more tangible than just giving funds that goes into some general pot. So the more specific you can be, the better. And as Bonney also said, you're really doing them a favor. People want to know how they can help. So and they want to know that it's making a difference. So sometimes it's easier to see that difference when it is something specific. And then the final point here, and this is one I also think that a lot of organizations do not think about, but I do get a lot of letters and appeals from other organizations, and it's just not uncommon to see a lot of typos, or poor grammar, or just poor flow. So it's always important to have somebody else look at your work. Bonney and I have worked together now for going on 20 years, and in multiple organizations, and we still always have each other read our own work if it's going out to the public. And then sometimes even getting somebody else involved that's maybe even less into it and less maybe, or can be more objective about it, but always have at least somebody review your work. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Bonney, and then we'll have questions at the end of the session.
Okay, here we go. I'm just going to switch to my screen, hopefully. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so we're going to switch gears and talk about events. And many groups that we've spoken to have had events planned and suddenly are thrown into really chaos because they don't know how they're going to make up the money they plan to raise through the event, and they're not really sure what to do. So our advice here is, before you cancel an event, talk and brainstorm with your team to see if you could possibly transition the event to become an online or virtual event. Some events, of course, lend themselves to this better than others, but a bit of creativity can really go a long way. So there are some benefits to virtual events. Just so you know, some organizations have actually seen a pretty dramatic increase in participation and in funds raised through their virtual event than their past in-person events. So that certainly shares something with you about the potential that's there in online or virtual events. Also, a virtual event tends to have lower overhead than an in-person event, and it can often be handled, managed, planned, and up and happening in a much shorter time frame than you could with a traditional event. And also, you could appeal to a much broader audience. So your cousin who lives in Seattle, halfway across the country from wherever you are, would be able to attend your virtual event where they would probably not be very likely to otherwise. So you really have a much broader audience, and you can ask all of your supporters to share news of the event with their friends and relatives that live all across the country. So ideas for virtual events. Now, if you already were planning an event and you're transitioning an event, it may be wise to retain the theme and the name of the event and simply transition it. However, I'd also encourage people to consider doing a virtual event even if you hadn't really planned one for this year, because there is so much potential there for your organization. And the ideas of what could be an online event are really as broad as your imagination. We've listed here some of the ones that we've heard about that have been successful. Some of these also have been run by not so much in welfare organizations as other nonprofits, but it's always a great idea to see what's happening out there and borrow good ideas and repeat them. So don't forget, while you're thinking about opportunities for online events, that there have been some long-standing online fundraising opportunities like online auctions. Many organizations do participate in these just for years, regularly. Often when you go to an auction, now people are using an auction app as opposed to the bid sheets that you used to see in the past. So an increasing number of donors are familiar with or comfortable with auctions. Also, for example, familiar platforms like eBay has eBay Charity, so you could run your charity auction through eBay, a platform that many of your supporters are already comfortable and familiar with. Live streamed events have been around a long time, Facebook Live, and these can be very powerful fundraising tools, but there are many others available to you as well that you could check out. And of course, crowdfunding. It tends to work best when you're trying to raise some money for something specific, but again, a very powerful tool, and there are several different online platforms that you could consider. So the most important thing when you're planning a virtual or online event is to think about platform or the web-based technology that you're going to use. First, you decide what kind of an event you're going to do. Then you look for the right place to host it. And this is just as you would with a live event, because an in-person event, because you would think about the event you wanted, and then you would go and look for the venue and select the location for your event. So the same applies here. The kind of event you decide to run is going to help guide you in terms of which you're going to select, what kind of technology or platform you're going to use. And as I mentioned, there are some very well-known ones that might work very well for you. For example, Zoom or WebEx. Many people have used those for various kinds of online events, but there are also many, many, many others out there, and they are all eager to help you. So most would be willing to walk you through a tutorial for how their program works. And you could also enlist the help of a tech-savvy friend. I'm sure at least one of your volunteers would be delighted to help you, that this may be their area of expertise, and they would be able to step in and help guide you in making the right decisions. Also, call other groups. This is one of the great things about our field, is people are willing to share. So if you do a search online and look at other virtual events that other shelters or other nonprofits have done, you could call that organization and ask if someone would be willing to talk with you about what worked, what didn't work so well, and that can be very valuable information for you. So the most important thing for the success of any event, but especially a virtual event, is to create a fun, exciting, interesting name and theme for the event. It's got to sound like something that you would want to take the time to be part of. Establish a purpose for the event. We've talked about this, both Diane and I, already, but people love knowing that what they are doing is going to make a difference for the animals. So you want to think that through as you plan your event and as you plan your communications with people about the event. You want to be sure it's really clear to people what difference their participation will make. And of course, you want to promote your event widely. You want to have a plan for how you're going to promote it, not only to your current donors and supporters, but to invite them to engage their friends, and also more widely, not only through social media, but through conventional media as well. Just to help you out with that, because we don't have enough time to go through every detail, we have put together a virtual fundraising event planning guide, which is the document that Bree mentioned that you can download. It was created especially for this webinar, and so you'll be the first folks to get to use it and see it, and hopefully that will help you. It gives you some specific advice on the top tips for organizing a successful virtual event. It goes through some event ideas, the ones I shared here, but also a few others. And then the guide provides you a step-by-step on a timeline, what you need to be doing to make sure your event all comes together, what you need to be doing 3 months out, 2 months out, the day before the event, that sort of thing. So hopefully it will make it easy for you to plan your first virtual event. So the last thing I'd like to mention is that even though this is a time filled with many challenges for many people and many organizations, it's also possible that we could be able to find a silver lining in here. As it has been for many years, many organizations have over-relied on events to raise the funds that they need. Events have become a bigger part of their fundraising pie than they really can be in order to be truly sustainable and truly successful. In-person events, they're time-consuming, they're expensive, and they are not always the most effective way to raise money. So if many groups took this as an opportunity to really revisit that, it may be that you could find a more cost-effective way to raise funds, and that would include developing a more balanced fundraising plan so that you are not only reaching out to donors via email and direct mail, but also having a plan to contact your high donors so that you can grow them into even larger, more substantial donors, into people who are even more engaged with your cause. And also the opportunity to try a virtual event and see how that works for your organization. So the hope is that in time we will get back to a point where in-person events can be part of our fundraising picture as well. But it could be that what will come out of this for us is a healthier, more sustainable balance of types of fundraising for organizations, so that our organizations will be more successful and more sustainable into the future, and able to ride future challenges and crises that may occur a little more easily. So in closing, whatever ways you decide to raise funds for your organization through this difficult time, please remember that you don't have to feel bad asking people for help. You're asking for help for the animals, and the animals are dependent on us, and your potential audience, they also care deeply about the animals. So they're going to be glad to hear from you when you reach out. Remember that there are people out there who really would find meaning from helping your organization. They'd be thrilled to help. And so by reaching out and asking for their support, you're really offering people a chance to feel good. Donating and giving is really fulfilling for people. And inviting people to support your work, you're really providing a wonderful opportunity to people to be part of the rewarding, important work that you do. So if you would like to reach out to us, we're going to answer some of your questions in just a minute, after, in just a moment, in fact. And but if after this webinar you have questions remaining, or there's just more information you would like, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Contact information is right here on the screen. Thank you again, and now we're going to hand things back to Bree. You might be muted, Bree.
Ah, sorry. I was just saying how wonderful all that information was, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I know I did. So, couple questions. I've seen a couple rolling in as we've gone through. So the first one is kind of touching back to that constant communication with donors that we were talking about. How do you feel about using Zoom as a platform to communicate with donors? Is it acceptable as a form of communication, or is it maybe too formal or too informal? How do we feel about Zoom?
Well, I'll chime in. I think it's great. And be it Zoom or any other online platform that you like, it adds the visual element, which I think helps make up for the fact that you probably can't meet with donors face to face. Especially if you have donors who are in an at-risk category, they're not going to be able to or want to meet, and you want to be very respectful of that. And Zoom gives you an opportunity to share. We've also heard of groups doing virtual tours and FaceTime, and there are other platforms or web-based technologies that can help you do that kind of thing as well. But I think Zoom is a great way to communicate. Diane, did you want to chime in?
Sure, I agree totally with Bonney. I think it's a great opportunity to at least build the relationship a little bit better than you can on a phone, because you can see people. But one caveat is that I would make sure people are comfortable with it. I know there's just a lot of people that do not like to be on camera, so just make sure you ask for their permission, and then also make it easy for them. It's something I like about Zoom is that you can just set it up with one click, but people are not necessarily going to be patient with having to go through a lot of steps in order to make it happen. So ask permission, make it easy, and then when at all possible, I think that definitely enhances the communication to have the visual.
Definitely. And the thing about Zoom is you could do it with a single donor, or you could do kind of a town hall meeting with several donors, or a focus group with donors. There's all kinds of ways that you could use it. You could tell people that it was okay if they didn't turn their camera on, if they didn't want to be seen or didn't want their home seen, whatever their concerns are. And another thing that I think Diane's point brings up for me is that question of comfort with technology. So when you're doing a virtual event, especially for the first time, you don't want some of your donors to feel sort of left behind by this. They may have been really looking forward to your real life event and now it's not happening. So you want to be sure they have the opportunity to participate through whatever technology you've chosen, and especially if it's a platform they're not familiar with, this can be quite intimidating for people. So one thing you could do is develop a brigade of volunteers. Just ask all your volunteers with an email request, or I guess you could do it through social media, but email would be a great way. It's a specific request, and you'd be asking people if they would be willing to work with people who were technologically unsure or challenged, that they would plan a call with them a couple of days before the event, step them through the actual process of signing into the event platform. And the kind of donor loyalty that would create, the relationship with your organization is really huge, and it wouldn't really cost any added money to do it.
That sounds great. Thank you. All right, so looking through our other questions, and just a reminder, everyone, you can use your questions box to submit those to me anytime. All right, so what if you are an individual? You want to help raise funds for animals and animal protection, but you're not necessarily a 501c3. Can you still fundraise?
Yes, you can. My recommendation, in order to be taken seriously by people who might give, would be to name the organization or organizations that are going to benefit from the donations that you're taking in. But absolutely, individuals can fundraise. I also think it's important to reach out to the organization so they know that you're using their name and don't hear about it third hand. Diane, I'm sure, has a lot to add to this, because we had a lot of people do that when we were at Nevada Humane Society.
Yes, I did. I had people approaching me all the time, and for the most part, they were having suggestions for us to do, or wanted us to kind of help be the organizer. But what I like to do is turn it around and enable them to really run with it as a third-party event. So it was not much effort for us. But I would always offer to provide our logo and maybe the mission statement or some kind of talking point so that it looked professional. I'd even review things with them. But the other thing we did was we created a list of types of things that people could do as a third-party fundraiser. And it just, it could be something as simple as a bake sale or a car wash. It was a little more complicated, but even other things that became easier for individuals to do. Like, we had several people that, instead of having, even kids, instead of having a birthday party for themselves and getting gifts, they collected items for the animals and brought them into the shelter. And then we made a big deal of it when they brought it in and celebrated their generosity through their birthday. So anyway, we collected ideas and provided those, published those, and always worked with groups or individuals to help them more easily be able to do these third-party fundraising events.
That's cute. I always love when I see a birthday invitation for, a friend's kid, and it's, donate here. And I'm always more inclined, I think, to maybe purchase a little bit bigger a gift than I might have, for a kid. So I'm wondering, with all of these different events, and so many people are out there kind of innovating and trying to think of what can we do? How can we make the best of the situation that we inevitably find ourselves in? Have you heard of an event, or do you have a favorite kind of, unique event that you've seen come out of this situation? I know for me, I've seen a couple groups that we've worked with. They are doing poorly drawn pet portraits like through social media, where I mean, I think you donate like $15 or $20, whatever works for their group, and just someone from their team will draw a picture of their pet. And obviously, in its name, these are not artists. You're not going to get a professional caricature, but you're going to get a poorly drawn pet portrait, which is still pretty cute, right? So just as like a fun, offhanded social media, I know that that appealed to me, and I'm just wondering if you guys have heard of any other fun ones.
Yeah, Diane has a few to share. One that, well, two that I can share with you. One was a virtual kitten shower, and they used to have in-person ones. So this was a converted event, and they did very well. Got donations of supplies and cash donations and volunteers, people who were going to then become kitten foster caregivers. And they successfully converted their existing event to an online event. So I'm going to let Diane share some, because she talked to a couple of groups that were interesting.
Right. One of them, I wouldn't say it was, certainly wasn't different in as far as unusual, but I think there was a interesting conclusion that they came from, and it was at Massachusetts SPCA, and they normally have an annual walk for animals, walk/run. And because of when it was scheduled, it was right in the middle of the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they decided to take it online, and they were very successful, still, without having, like Bonney said, all the extra expense of trying to do it in person. But they also learned something else from it, is that in the original version in person, they had lots of people who participated that were more into it just because they loved walks and races, and they felt that the registration fee that they were contributing was their donation, not realizing that that was covering or barely covering the expenses that they had. And they did not engage in the additional peer-to-peer fundraising type activity. So the ones that did participate in the virtual event were the dedicated fundraising folks that made a big difference, and it allowed them to rethink, even if they go back to a live event, of how they do it in the future and how they focus and who they focus on. So I thought that was an interesting outcome. Another one is Seattle Humane Society, and they had a gala planned, kind of a traditional gala called Tucks and Tails, that they had to postpone because, again, it was scheduled during the pandemic, or during even the beginning of the pandemic. They have rescheduled it for September, hoping that they can do it. But what they did in the meantime is they created a series of online events that were related to it, had the same theme. And I think it was not only to keep people interested in the ultimate event, but also to keep an opportunity open for people to donate. And one of the things they did was had signature cocktail tutorials while you watched a live stream of a kitten cam, and ended up having those kittens actually also available for adoption. So, and my understanding is they did a whole series of smaller online events as they are working their way up to hopefully holding the big in-person gala in the fall.
That's great. And just to share a couple of other ideas, several groups that I've spoken to have done, I guess, presentations, for lack of a better word, like getting a well-known animal behaviorist to do a presentation, and people pay a modest fee to access that presentation, and then it's recorded so they could also view the recording. One group that I've worked with on and off for years had a gala planned, and it happened right when everything shut down. And so they had planned to have Michael Mountain fly from Utah to speak at their event. Well, of course, then nobody was supposed to be flying anywhere. So on very short notice, they figured out how to convert the event to a virtual event. And speaker appear that way. But you could really see potentially you could get a speaker who you think is going to be exciting and interesting to your constituents, really from anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, to appear virtually. And some groups that do virtual tours, like a behind the scenes tour of their clinic or their shelter virtually, you can have pre-recorded segments of that. So you could line up donors to speak about what your organization means to them and have those segments already pre-recorded. You probably wouldn't want to do that with the whole entire thing, but it certainly can take the pressure off to have elements of it all ready to go before. And you could highlight specific animals for adoption as part of a virtual tour kind of thing, and those two could be potentially pre-recorded. So planning out your event, it would take some effort, but when you consider how much time and effort goes into a real in-person event, there really is an opportunity here to engage a lot more people at a lower cost, at a quicker turnaround time for event planning. And the events can be recorded so that if someone couldn't make it that day, they could still receive the link to the recording. Some groups use swag that they send out to people who register by a certain date. So there's all kinds of ways you can try to make the event exciting. And there's also ways you can use audience interaction, be it a commenting or a chat, or some very different platforms offer different ways for people to be participating and communicating with each other. So it isn't just strictly a one-way stream.
Thank you. And so I think the lesson here is don't be afraid to get creative, right? Try something new, see what happens. You never know what you're going to learn. And so with that, do you have any last words of wisdom? I think we have taken up a chunk of your time here today, and we're just so grateful for you being here to share this information and to help us keep helping folks around the country as we all navigate to tomorrow and next week and the day after that. And so thank you so much.
Thanks, Bree. We're very grateful to Alley Cat Allies for thinking about this webinar and getting the word out to people. And, I think to some really, what you said, get creative and give it a try. And remember that people still care about the animals and they really want to hear from you.
And I just like to say in closing, don't hesitate to reach out to us directly too. We're more than happy to share information that we have or hook you up with other groups. I think our field is especially wonderful because most people really want to share. And I know when I talk to people about their events, they were very proud that we even asked and are more than happy to share. So if you need any additional information about any of the things we talked about today, Bonney and I both are really happy to talk to you directly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both again for your time. Thank you to everyone who joined us today or is watching this as a recording at a later date. We hope that you are safe and well, and thank you for being an advocate for animals. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.